Hi, everybody. Welcome to Dave's Top 3,000 Songs of the Rock Era. I'm your host, David Tear. Where, as the title suggests, I'm featuring a countdown of my personal top 3,000 songs of the rock era from 1954 to 1999. And today I'm up to song number 2528, and that one is Are You Ready by Pacific Gas and Electric. And this came out in 1970. It went to number 14. It was also released on their 1970 album called Are You Ready? And here's a picture of the band Pacific Gas and Electric. They were a pretty big band. They were formed, I'll talk about the band in a minute. First, I want to talk about this song. Um, I don't know if I'd call it a gospel song, but it's about the second coming. I mean, I guess, they're singing about all this bad stuff that's going on in the world. I mean, there were a lot of songs like this in the early 70s. I guess a lot of people were getting disillusioned, probably mainly because of Vietnam. We were still in Vietnam, and there were a lot of other problems going on. And I guess a lot of young people were just getting very disillusioned. And I think a lot of them thought, that doomsday was approaching. I guess when people kind of have that kind of attitude, which happens a fair amount. I mean, I think a lot of people are thinking that now too. Because just how shitty things are with Trump. And we're dictatorship now. I think things are actually a lot worse now than they were in the early 70s. I remember the early 70s. I mean, I wasn't in Vietnam, so I didn't experience that firsthand. But you know, uh, you know, I just want to say a little bit more about this because I've never been religious. At least I've never subscribed to any mainstream religion, even though I was raised as a Jew. And my parents sent me to Sunday school and temple when I was a kid. I never liked it. I just never believed in the Bible, and I never believed in mainstream religion. I have become more spiritual, I'd say, over the years, but I kind of have my own spiritual views, and they don't completely jibe. But most of them aren't that compatible with mainstream religion, at least not Western religion. But I just want to say something that I think is kind of interesting. I don't know what you guys think about this, but I know that in the mid 60s, I think the New York Times ran an article in the mid 60s, I think it was 65, where they said that God was dead. And I mean, it kind of seemed that way for a while. It seemed like mainstream religion was kind of losing credibility in a lot of the world, at least a lot of the Western world. Maybe with all the new science and technology, maybe people weren't really taking the Bible seriously anymore. And people, I think also we were experimenting with a lot of different ways of life, and we were kind of developing our own moral views, which didn't always agree with the Bible or with, how traditional religion has approached morality. But what I find kind of interesting, I think Don McLean summed it up pretty well. The last verse of American Pie. He said, "The three men that you admired most, the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, they took the last train for the coast the day the music died." And I think that's kind of what happened. I guess, mid 60s, people stopped going to church and they kind of divorced themselves from mainstream religion, not just that, but mainstream society as well. But then I think, things just got so crazy by the end of the decade and by the early 70s. And I think a lot of people kind of, turned to Jesus anyway. I mean, and it was mostly, I think, in California, which was kind of the new mecca of at least America. There was even a documentary movie I watched about a year ago called The Jesus Revolution, about this hippie who I guess the Christians accepted as a new spokesman for Christianity. And I mean, it never worked for me. But I mean, maybe I'm not the person to criticize it because I mean, everybody has a right to believe what works for them. It's just that mainstream Western religion never worked for me, despite how bad things have been. Um, but maybe that's enough said about this song. Now I'm going to talk about the band Pacific Gas and Electric. And, they started out in 67. They weren't together very long. They were only together for 6 years, from 1967 to 1973. And they started out as kind of a blues rock band. I don't know if you could call them blues rock or psychedelic rock. There were a lot of psychedelic bands in the late 60s, and I guess they kind of started out as one. The original name was the Pacific Gas and Electric Blues Band. They were formed in Los Angeles, so they were a California band. And their name kind of reminds me of Chicago. The rock group Chicago, who was from Chicago. They were originally known as the Chicago Transit Authority. The Chicago Transit Authority, or the CTA, in Chicago, they forced them to change their name to because they didn't like them using the name of their company. And I'm a little surprised that Pacific Gas and Electric got away with it, because they're also the name of a company. They're the name of PG&E, the utility company responsible for a lot of the utilities in California. And I guess it was okay with them to keep the name Pacific Gas and Electric. They weren't anywhere nearly as big as the band Chicago. Um, their original members were Tony Marshall on guitar, Brent Block on bass, Glenn Schwartz on lead guitar, who was formerly of the James Gang, Charlie Allen on drums, formerly of Blackberry Jam, and he later, he was such a good singer, they later made him the front man, put him on legal vocals as well as lead guitar, and then they replaced him as drummer with Frank Cook, who was formerly of Canned Heat. So that was the original lineup of Pacific Gas and Electric. As you can see, they added a few members. They had many membership changes, I guess, over the years. And I'm just going to go through the hits. They didn't have very many hits. Are You Ready was their only top 40 hit, actually. That was their first hit in 1970. That one went to number 14. Later that year, they had Father Come On Home, which went to number 93. And then the following year, 1971, they had Thank God for Your Baby, which went to number 97. So those were the only hits for Pacific Gas and Electric. And, it's interesting. Like I said, even though I'm not a fan of mainstream religion, and I'm not religious in the traditional sense, I actually do feature a fair number of kind of religious songs on my list. Gospel. I do like gospel music. Even though I don't believe in most of the message, the music is very moving, and I guess this song is just a case in point. So you'll see a lot more gospel songs on my list. A few of them pretty high up, as a matter of fact. Anyway, that concludes my feature on Are You Ready by Pacific Gas and Electric. So thank you for watching. You guys rock, and I'll see you next time. Bye.